individual rights advocacy as having to speak after Jérémie. I'll do my best to brew a story for you because I like Hefeweizen. If any of you are coming to Brussels, feel free. I'd just like to mention two things that Jérémie said. Firstly, about moving from place to place to find a forum that is listening. Last November, EDRI was invited to a consultation in the Council of Europe on a new convention on neighbouring rights for broadcasters, which I went to in Strasbourg. And at the introduction, the person from the Council of Europe said, okay, well, we're launching this because there have been 12 years of discussions in WIPO, and they didn't get anywhere. So the European Broadcasting Union has lobbied us to launch a convention here. So we're launching a convention here. I said, do you have any evidence to suggest that a convention is necessary? And they said, no. The second thing I'd like to point out to try to echo what Jérémie said is that the European Parliament overwhelmingly said that for sanctions to be imposed against an internet user, there needs to be a prior judicial ruling. And everything that's happening at every international level and every national level I'm aware of goes against this. You can always spot a politician that doesn't know much about the internet because they can't get from one end of the speech to the other without, when talking about the internet, without mentioning those famous, wonderful words, rechtsfreier lawless area. Now that I've been given the honour of speaking at this event, I'd like to talk to you about those politicians creating a rechtsfreier Raum. Because similar to Turkey's voting for Christmas, governments are voting to give government responsibilities to private companies. In the internet environment, developed democracies like Germany, France, the UK, and regional administrations like the European Union are slowly giving up on the rule of law, on transparency, on due process, and on the very openness that's the core of the success of the internet. A silent handshake, as one academic said, is being reached between internet intermediaries and governments. This silent handshake threatens the values of the internet. It is a tacit agreement whereby internet access providers can interfere with private traffic for commercial reasons, as long as those companies also police the internet on behalf of governments. There are three different developments all happening at the same time, which are leading to an explosion of privatization of law enforcement online. On the one hand, you have changes in the law that make internet providers less secure. There are weaker safe harbors for them if somebody is doing anything illegal on the networks. Separately from that, governments are keen to save money and resources, and so they're saying, okay, let the internet providers self-regulate. And when they mean self-regulate, they don't mean self, and they don't mean regulate. They mean enforce laws on other people and on their own consumers. And the third thing which is happening, which was also discussed earlier this morning, is the net neutrality issue. Internet providers are becoming more interested in interfering with personal communications in order to provide a non-neutral access to the internet. And once they are interfering with internet traffic for their own commercial benefit, the copyright lobby is going to say, well, can't you interfere with it for our benefit? And the child protection industry is going to say the same thing, and I said industry deliberately. And you have Silvio Berlusconi asking Telecom Italia, saying, well, can we come to a little agreement, maybe? And so between these three different elements, you have the makings of the end of openness of the internet. Governments are imposing direct obligations on internet providers. So, for example, you have the Adobe law that Jérémie mentioned. You have the Digital Economy Act in the UK. And these require or imply interference with consumers' personal data, blocking of online resources, and cooperation with or even enforcement of sanctions. There are also indirect obligations. So in Ireland, for example, there was a court case against the largest company called Eircom, and they felt that their legal protections weren't secure enough. So they volunteered to introduce a 3 strikes regime in Ireland. So Eircom volunteered to police their network, to judge possible infringements, to decide on whether those infringements were indeed infringements, so they also became the jury. And they also became the executioner, because it is Eircom that decides whether or not the sanction of being cut off from the internet is applied. Interestingly, Jan mentioned the uneven transposition of data protection legislation in Ireland. This process where private companies gather personal data online and present it to the internet provider, Eircom, for their investigations, was discussed by the Irish High Court. And the Irish High Court decided that the personal data collected for the purpose of identifying people was not personally identifiable data. And so the private policing goes on. The second point is the technical capabilities of internet providers. In the old days, internet access providers provided access to the internet, and that was it. They did so passively. They had no interest in knowing what the consumers were doing, and they weren't able to find out. Now you have companies that are more and more interested in getting payments from both sides of the communication. They'd like Google to pay to access you, and they'd like you to pay to access Google. It's much better to be paid twice than to be paid once. The problem is that the more they're interfering for that purpose, as I said, the more they're going to lose their defense. They can't say, we can't interfere with personal data, when they are interfering with personal data. You also have a situation where access providers are increasingly merging with or cooperating with content companies. So Virgin Media in the UK is a very good example. Virgin Media is an access provider, and Virgin Media is also part of Virgin Entertainment. So you have government saying, can you possibly police the internet a little bit better, please? And you have Virgin Media going, actually, we can police our network in order to stop people sharing files. And that means that they buy our products more readily. So what does this mean? Well, in December of last year, Virgin Media put out a press release, which was quite interesting. It said that it was going to undertake deep packet inspection of 40% of its subscribers in order to assess the amount of unauthorized file sharing that was going on. Not to police it, mind you, just to find out, because they're never going to do anything. So you then have government saying, please police the internet more. You've got the ISPs obliged to police it more. So what does this all mean in the real world? There are these paranoid NGOs that reckon that everyone's watching them and everyone's out to get them, so maybe I'm just one of those people. Well, I'll just give you a brief overview of what's happening in Brussels. The Internal Market Directorate of the European Commission is holding a dialogue with internet access providers and the content industry on cooperation on illegal uploading and downloading. We invite the internet providers and discuss the possibilities for filtering, for cutting people off, for carrying out surveillance. And the European Consumer Bureau was invited to participate, but it was so biased, the whole process was so biased that they decided that they couldn't possibly participate. So the internet providers sit there in the European Commission, and the European Commission tells them, look, we're currently reviewing the IPR Enforcement Directive. You've got a choice. You can volunteer to do something, or we're going to review the IPR Enforcement Directive and impose something on you, which could be a lot worse than what you might come up with yourselves. What would you like to do? DG Internal Market of the European Commission is also having a dialogue with online traders. And the purpose of this dialogue with online traders like eBay and so on is, to quote from their internal working document, to have in place and enforce scalable, transparent and deterring sanctions scheme applicable to repeat infringers according to their own internal guidelines. Namely, in other words, if eBay feels that you have been breaching copyright, then they should be cutting you off and preventing you from accessing their service. DG Home Affairs of the European Commission is currently involved in a public-private cooperation to counter the dissemination of illegal content in the European Union. I attended the last meeting of this. They presented the hosting industry, European hosting industry, with a possible agreement that they may possibly want to sign, where they delete websites which have been accused of containing illegal information. This is actually quite an interesting proposal, because one of the sections was what to do if a customer comes to you and says this particular website is illegal. What you should do, according to the European Commission, is look at it, and if it is illegal, you should delete it. And I raised my hand and said, sorry, is that it? And they said, yes, yes. No, we're talking about really serious crime that's really blatantly illegal, that's terrorism or child abuse. And I said, yeah, it's a public-private agreement, you said. They said, yes. Should there be an investigation? Do you want to talk to the criminals? Do you want any evidence? And they said, that might be useful. The whole concept of public authorities being involved in investigations and finding criminals is gone out the window. It is truly, and that is not an exaggeration of the conversation, I stress. DG Home Affairs also funded a project called the Financial Coalition Against Child Pornography. And the purpose of this particular organization was to identify flows of money in order to cut off money being spent by customers on child abuse material. This copies a similar project in the United States. I talked to one of the founders of the organization in the United States, and I said, look, why exactly do you as private companies feel the need to do this? And they went, and I said, look, why are you doing it? Why is this a private enterprise? And they said, because government authorities are not interested, and we felt we had to do something.